Welcome to Legal Nurse Podcast. My name is Pat Iyer. I have the pleasure of bringing to you an experienced legal nurse consultant, Gyalia Rutledge. Gyalia has background in critical care, neonatal ICU, pediatric ER, adult ER, and as an experienced legal nurse consultant working independently for many years, she is the creator of a service that she calls RN Callback. And I invited her onto the podcast today so that we could talk a little bit about this service and how she offers attorneys an effective, cost-effective, clinically effective, and legally effective solution to when attorneys receive calls from prospective plaintiffs. Gyalia, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Pat. I appreciate it.
You're most welcome. Tell us a little bit about this concept of RN callback.
Well, to be honest with you, it just kind of came to me one day when I was consistently getting phone calls from primarily one or two attorneys who would say, "Can I run this one by you?" And in the course of the conversation, I would ask these questions that he couldn't answer. And so one particular day I said, "Do you mind if I just call the client directly?" And he said, "Yeah, would you please?" And so I called the client, spoke to them directly, introduced myself as this attorney's legal nurse representing the firm. He had given me permission to do that. And I just went through a very detailed timeline of the medicine of what actually transpired, the care that was rendered, what was discussed, what was their discharge instructions, those sorts of things, how long it had been since they'd contacted a physician. And in the course of the conversation, I could either quickly tell, one, this is not going to be a case because we've either got breach of standard of care issues, liability, or we have no damages. We don't have enough damages to justify the cost of litigation. And so those were generally the two that I could identify very quickly. And so then I would then in turn call the attorney back and let them know that this is what my findings were. And then they would make a decision. Well, that concept right there kind of launched me into thinking that this probably was a marketing tool. And I actually went to a attorney conference and had this on a poster that I had put up, and I just dubbed it RN callbacks, and it immediately intrigued attorneys as to what's an RN callback, which opened the door to just tell them, what I was doing. And so one of the attorneys asked me to come speak to his attorney luncheon group. I explained the concept to them, and it kind of took off from there. Now I've learned a lot. And so it's just kind of developed, and I've learned a lot of what works and doesn't work, and I've learned a lot of what questions to ask, and I've learned a lot about how attorneys think, even more so than I did, having been in this business for about 19 years now. So it really opened up an entirely different aspect of legal nurse consulting that has turned out to be quite effective.
I can envision you standing there and having a line of attorneys interested in this. Tell us about what type of volume of calls you handle and how many calls you think a legal nurse consultant could handle working by himself or herself.
Well, I've learned that you can overwhelm yourself with this process if you're not careful. So the law firm that I primarily do the service for now, I generally do roughly anywhere from 30 to 60 calls a month. Now that's 5 attorneys in that group. And so I find that allows me time to then focus on case reviews, report writing, research, expert witness location, so it doesn't consume all of my time. Now, depending on your business model, depending on how you function and how you work, you very well could do just this service without, anything else behind it. However, I do think that most attorneys, once they trust you in this process, they're also going to trust you in the review process. So I can't see an attorney trusting you to be able to, screen these calls up front without actually wanting you to review any records behind that. So it varies. I do know that I have tried to do multiple groups at once, but with my other volume, it turned out to be too much. So I personally just stuck with one group of 5 attorneys, and then I have about 3 attorneys that I do roughly just a few calls for them a month. So it just depends on the volume, how much you want to market, but that's the volume that I do that I find manageable. But that allows me time between 30 to 60 calls a month. I end up doing anywhere from 2 to up to 5 or 6 calls a day, depending on, the day. And it can get a little bit heavier than that, but most of these calls take a little time. So it's not a 5-minute phone conversation. I have been on the phone for an hour, particularly depending on how much closure these patients need on the death of a loved one, or all the questions. And it also depends on how much they are. Sometimes you just have to listen. So that's the volume that I do. That's the volume that I find manageable, in that it allows me to do the rest of my workload that I have on top of that.
Patients occasionally find me now. They found me a lot more frequently when I ran my business in Flemington. And I know that I got a lot of calls directly from patients who were suspicious that their medical records were tampered with, because I had some publications and blog posts and a product on tampering with medical records. So I can verify how long it could take to hear out the story, and how hard it was for the potential plaintiffs to hear, I can't work with you as a legal nurse consultant until you have a relationship with an attorney. You have to have an attorney willing to accept your case. And they felt like they were caught up in a circular problem. Well, I can't get them to accept my case because my records are falsified, and I need an attorney to prove my records are falsified. And we would spin round and round. I would imagine that sometimes the conversations that you encounter are difficult, particularly if a patient or potential plaintiff has a mindset that says they did me wrong and this couldn't have happened if somebody hadn't screwed up, and I want you to prove it. So how do you navigate those kinds of conversations? Because I would think that they could be awkward.
I actually get a lot of calls that saying they've falsified my records. I look at the medicine itself. The way that I navigate this is I navigate the medicine itself. In other words, regardless of what the medical record says, let me listen to the story of the patient to see if the medicine adds up. There are certain things that people try and connect in their heads, and the dots just don't match, right? The physiology just doesn't work. Now, if the physiology works for me and the medical records are not answering my questions, that's when I start digging and I start looking at documentation times. I start looking at what's missing in the record, those sorts of things. If it's an electronic record, it's been my and Pat, please, interject. I know you're the expert in this particular area, but just in my experience, the medical record in an electronic format either shows one or two things. There's vastly missing documentation, or documentation that's done well after the fact, all at the same time. So I've got a forensic, a stamp there that says either electronically signed or no, documentation that allows me to follow the track of potentially what have happened. A large portion of that time, if I think there's something wrong with the medicine and I'm missing pieces of the documentation, to me, that raises a red flag. And I open, I let the attorney know that I want to, open an investigation. Now, I have a close and working relationship with these guys, in that whenever if somebody asks me, let's say I'm at church or I'm at Walmart or I'm at an outside, and somebody comes up and asks me, I have a card with this attorney's group, and I immediately say, I work with this group. Let me talk with them. And they're very good at backing up whatever I say because I have that relationship with them. So I very rarely get contact. Well, I won't say that. When I do get contacted outside the law firm, like independently, I immediately bring it back to the law firm that I'm working for, right? I immediately bring that back and talk with those gentlemen first. But when it comes to tampering with electronic records or falsifying records, I start with the medicine itself to see if the discussion or the viewpoint of the medicine makes sense outside of the medical record, if that makes sense. And then if it does, then I see if the record either backs it up or it creates more questions. Because for me, a lot of times it'll create more questions than answers when I find things that are just not right. That's how I approach it. I'm sure there's different viewpoints on how to approach it. I know that you can, dig forensically into medical records and find out all kinds of stuff, but that's way into an investigation. So that's just the way that I manage it. But again, when it starts with a phone call, and I hear this a lot, they put something in my medical record that was a lie, that was this, that was this. I just say, let's start with the medicine. Tell me what happened in your medical care, and then we take it from there. That's how I start. I'm sure you have a different opinion or difference of opinion or could add to that because I know that you are very well written in that area. That's just my experience in the matter.
Yeah, there are people who are suspicious that there's been tampering with records, and there has been.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who are suspicious about tampering, and there has not been any tampering. There's been potentially a very big misunderstanding.
Right. And most of the time I find it's communication between the provider and the patient.
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. And miscommunication in the absence of damages isn't going to cut it, as right. you recommend. And yeah. I know that the person watching this on our YouTube channel at Legal Nurse Business or listening to it on the audio channels are going to think, well, how often does Gyalia actually find a case that is worth pursuing, that the law firm will take on and sign up the client out of those, let's just say 60 calls a month? What are the numbers like?
Well, it varies, obviously, month to month. And sometimes I can have 30 to 40 declines. And then sometimes I get some back to back to back. It does vary. So if I had to estimate and guess and just kind of, I haven't, if I haven't kept track of this to give you specific numbers, I could go back and count. But we probably sign up or have meetings with and get medical records to review 5 out of the 30 or 40 or so, sometimes more. Sometimes we'll get referrals from other, obviously law firms who want to send it to our firm simply because they know they have me that is assisting them and helping them, and I can do a quick look at it. So there is a fair number that we turn down from the beginning. There's a large number, which saves a tremendous amount of time on the attorney's time because I'm managing all of that time that they would normally spend on phone calls that didn't go anywhere. Their time obviously is more valuable if we're talking dollars. And so my time is more cost effective for their firm to have me do those phone calls. Now, when the other thing that I have found is when we do decide to investigate in the state of Georgia, which is where I'm located, getting medical records, we have the clients get medical records and make them have somewhat what we call a skin in the game. We get them to help us with our investigation. And so when I am on a phone call and I've decided that this warrants an investigation, the first thing I do is go talk to the attorney and let them know what my thoughts are and let them know where my suspicions are and let them know what I think behind the science. Then they will 99.9% of the time say, let's go ahead and get the medical records. Well, when we request medical records from the law firm, if the law firm requests medical records, State of Georgia can charge us 30 cents per page, even if it's an electronic format. If the client requests a copy of their medical records, it costs them $10.50 just for the cost of the disk and an administrative fee. So the savings can run anywhere from thousands of dollars for one record. And it has been a huge savings because we get more information quicker up front in the investigation, and it's more cost effective. And I manage all of that time for the attorney as far as managing, keeping up with the records, talking with the client, giving them instructions on how to get the records. So it has not only become a big time saver for the attorneys up front. We investigate more efficiently and at more of a cost savings to the attorney group because it's cheaper in that aspect. So we don't investigate as many, but we don't spend our time wasting time on as many either. So probably 5 in a month we will really dive into. Sometimes, especially if it's a referral from another client, from another attorney group, I'll refer it, even though if I had talked to the client, I probably would have declined it, but we'll go ahead and take a look at the records. But even this morning, I had a phone call when the guy says, look, we signed this client up several months ago. We should have had you look at the records. You probably can go through this thing in 15 minutes and tell us if it's a yes or no. So he already knew up front that I could give him a very quick answer. And I'm like, yes, sir, I'll have you an answer in the morning. So that's kind of how, the volume just really depends. And it depends on several things because every attorney is different. The types of cases that they want are different. The clientele that, different parts of the country are different. It really varies on what your attorneys are looking for. And you're going to have to learn what they like and be okay with them saying no. And so I don't want to investigate. And so it's going to vary from client to client, from firm to firm, and it's going to vary depending on probably the area of the country that you're in, or wherever you're at in your region. So it can be very, very cost effective, and it can be very much more efficient if nurses can get in the door to start this process with the attorneys and only investigate cases that really probably need to be looked at.
But you've outlined several benefits for this service, including saving time, saving money on medical records, saving effort on cases that don't have a future. What does this do for the reputation of the law firm that uses your service?
That's an excellent question, because I don't think I recognized the impact it would have on the law firm. So what happened when I started working and doing this service, the attorneys gave me an email address and did a business card. Even though I'm a subcontractor, they just created an email account for me and allowed me to have access to all of the medical record files in their server. And so what happened is when they started sending these calls to me and started ferreting these out, they would start sending me email referrals from other client groups, from other attorney groups, who either couldn't take the case on, or was trying to get a referral, or didn't do medical malpractice. And so what I found was the referrals just kept growing, in that when I could say yes or no very quickly, the attorneys just stopped bypassing the attorney, so to speak. Not really, but other outside attorneys would just send the cases directly to me and just copy the attorney on it instead of sending it to the attorney directly. And they'd say, hey, Gayla, what do you think about this? Gayla, what's your thoughts on this? And so the referrals just really went exponentially up, because they just saw that they could quickly evaluate records. They weren't waiting on medical records. They can get an initial kind of a quick yes or no without having to request medical records, just from a client's story. And it really sent the calls up. Our volume went up. Our presence in the community went up. Our presence with the other law firms in the area that sent stuff went up. Our Google reviews went up. And I didn't expect that, and it happened quite quickly. And so I was immediately, getting bombarded with a lot of referrals from other guys who even would contact me, independently to see if they could hire me to look at a case that they otherwise wouldn't have known, how to get in contact with me. So it really, really opened it up for marketing for the law firm. It allowed them to have some validity when they declined cases because they felt like they had the backing of the medical community, and they recognized the resources that I had as a legal nurse. They had resources that they didn't otherwise have quickly available to them. My expert witness, database that I had, the friends that I have that are still in the medical community, the people that I could quickly get answers from neurosurgery to pediatric intensivists to OBGYNs or to, I just immediately had a wide range of contacts and resources that they didn't otherwise have. So it really, really has made an impact in their business because all of these guys are now sending cases or wanting to work as co-counsel with them, which has been a big thing that I didn't realize was needed in the community. So it's really been a very, very good thing for them as well, as far as the marketing aspect, the business side of it.
You just mentioned something that I wanted to explore a little bit, which is how you charge for the service. And when you just mentioned being able to tap the knowledge of a variety of specialists, do those people who you contact and say, hey, look, we've got this potential case. I want to ask you a couple of questions. Do those people who are giving you what we call curbside consults, do they expect to be paid for that interaction? And if so, how do you manage that? And if they don't expect to be paid, how does that work out? Before we continue with the show, I'd like to share this special announcement with you. I'm Pat Iyer, an experienced legal nurse consultant. I have worked with hundreds of subcontractors. The following characteristics stand out for me. Be quick. I knew nurses who wanted to be LNCs but couldn't figure out how to use the computer template or organize or analyze medical records. They read every word of the extraneous information found in medical records. Beginners need a learning curve, but this has its limits. Company owners avoid sending attorneys unjustifiably large invoices. They can't charge attorneys for a lot of learning time. Ask yourself honestly if you're a quick learner. If you're not, LNC work may not be for you. Point number 2, be responsive. My attorney's clients suggest to me their biggest complaint is that they called expert witnesses saying they needed a report and they never received a response. Then they called me. I dreaded those calls. Non-responsive subcontractors didn't last long with me. An LNC who gives you cases needs you to return phone calls and meet deadlines. There's often no room to negotiate an extension of deadlines. Number 3, be reliable. Attorneys have non-negotiable court-imposed deadlines. They don't want to hear that your car broke down, or that you waited till the last minute, or your computer crashed. There's usually no leeway. Number 4, be coachable. Be open to feedback, to look at the proofreading somebody else has done to your report, and learn from the suggestions. Your work product must be impeccable. Number 5, be ethical. It's unethical for an attorney to go behind the legal nurse consultant's back and attempt to hire you. If the LNC boss asks you to sign a non-compete agreement, follow its terms. Even if you didn't, it's an unwritten rule that you will not attempt to steal the LNC's client. You will be labeled as untrustworthy. Learn much more about the details of being a subcontractor in LNC Subcontracting, How to Boost Your Business. At this link, lnc.tips/creating the series. Now let's return to the show.
Well, a lot of these, quote, curbside, expert opinions, so to speak, obviously is a conversation. But what I have found is that it opens the door to case reviews for nurses and physicians who want to get involved in this market and wouldn't otherwise have a way to get in. And so they have been very gracious. The people that I call have been extremely gracious and, off the books, can I just pick your brain? And then if I get the response that I'm expected to get or that I think I'm going to get, the first thing I say is, are you interested in reviewing this case? And absolutely, they'd be the first person I send it to. So it's, in my mind, it is a marketing tool to allow networking and interactions, because to me, that just opens doors for other potential clients and other case reviews. So I generally have a large, it also helps that my brother and sister-in-law are physicians. So I have one that's been an ER physician for years, and he's now chief medical officer, and one that's a pediatric intensivist. So I pretty much have got, cradle to the grave, so to speak. So it does help to have them, but a majority of them are nursings that want to get involved in legal nurse consulting as experts, but they don't know quite how to get their name out there. And so this is a door, in my opinion, that helps open that up to have this conversation and to send the cases to them. Now, as far as the way that I charge for my calls I have, for the one law firm that I do this for, I tried this with two, but I found I didn't want to work this terribly hard. I have a set amount for a set amount of hours. So in other words, I'm under contract for a set amount of dollars per month, and they get a set amount of legal nurse consulting hours per month. So I give them 20 hours a week, 80 hours a month, and they pay me X amount of dollars, and we have a contract to that effect. If I go over that amount, then they pay me at a rate after that we've set ahead of time, and it's agreed upon, and all of that is written down. Now, for the guys who call me outside and I do phone calls for them, I just charge a dollar amount. My regular, quote, review amount. I would just set my clock and have it running. And then when I bill it as RN callback. And so they know that I'm on conversation with the clients at that time. It's not a review charge, it's an RN callback charge. And pretty much that's my review. If it's my review rate, but I'm just happen to be on the phone call talking with the client. But I may only do 1 or 2 or 3 phone calls for them a month. And speaking of that, for those guys, what it does for their perception of the client is that they have validity to their staff. They have someone that they have quick access to, and it actually makes them appear larger than they actually may be, or when it's just 1 or 2 people in that law firm. And so it has been a good resource, because I have several that I do this in Savannah down, which is a couple hours for me because I'm in the Augusta area. And so it has helped for them in some of the outlying communities that are a little bit smaller communities. It helps them as well. So if you have a client group that wants to start this, then I would suggest setting a contract amount per month. It helps me budget. I know how much money's coming in. I don't worry about my cases going up and down and the number of cases going up and down. I have a set amount per month. I get started at the beginning of a case and can see it all the way to the end of a case, from the first phone call to depositions to settlement, mediation settlement. So I like it because I'm hands-on involved from, beginning to end, and it works very, very, very well. So that's the way that I do it. Obviously, it just depends on your clientele and how much work, but it is another avenue of marketing that you can use to get your foot in the door and to provide another service for these guys that they probably haven't even considered before. So I have found it to be very effective. And the people that I have utilize this for, they find it to be extremely effective in the perception of the clients, because sometimes they just need closure, right? They just need time to evaluate and think through actually what happened to their loved one that was unexpected, and have someone in the medical community tell them that, there was probably not anything done wrong, that, it was just a bad outcome unexpectedly. And if there was in another hospital in another part of the country, we may have the same outcome. And sometimes that's enough for people to have closure, and for people to say, okay, and they can put their loved ones to rest a lot of times. So I have found that to be extremely effective as well. Again, it's going to depend on your community. It's going to depend on your market. It's going to depend on how you're working as to how you need to bill. And you might need to play around that a little bit. That's just the way that it works for me, and that I have found works where I'm at.
And I have two more questions for you, Gayla, before we end. The first is, who is the ideal legal nurse consultant to provide this service? In other words, is this the role of a experienced LNC, a beginner LNC, or an LNC with a particular type of clinical background? What guidance can you give us on that question?
I think that I would be extremely, if you're a new LNC and you're just getting your feet in this business, I would get very grounded in case evaluations first. I would be very confident in understanding how you navigate this business. I would not, if you've been in this business a while and you're getting case reviews from a particular group and you've got a good working relationship, then I'd say that you're perfect for offering this service and opening the door. I have found that nurses, all of us that have been in this business a while recognize that what we perceive to transition, what we perceive to be important in medicine doesn't always transition to the legal side, right? So you have to be able to understand standard of care, causation, and damages to be able to effectively navigate. And I think that requires some experience in the legal nurse consulting world. If you have been in this business a while, you understand how these cases work, and you understand how, what's the important things to look out for and what might not be such an important thing to look out for, I say give it a try and see how you navigate. I do have kind of a form that I have developed that gives some questions to start with, that I have found that most attorney groups want to know ahead of time. And one of the main things that they want to know ahead of time, if you do decide to do this is just a simple little cheat sheet note for myself, is, you obviously name, age, and telephone number, and contact information, but past medical history is a big one. Are you a smoker? Is there past history of drug abuse? Kind of what's their normal, activities of daily living? Were they independently living, or were they living in a nursing home? To kind of get an idea of what your damages are potentially are, and so where your patient started versus, where they're at now. Past medical history is a big deal. You have someone that's had, 5-vessel cabbage, 5 years ago, and has got AFib with rapid ventricular response, and has got a pacemaker, and has got an ejection fraction of 30%. With a sudden death, that may be a clue that we probably have got a very sick heart here. And even if everybody did anything right, we might have an issue. So you have to be able to take into account the patient's past medical history prior to the incident, and then allow the patient to talk through, or the client to talk through, the story of whoever was involved. So if you're a critical care nurse, if you have a past history of intensive care, pediatric intensive care, emergency room nursing, if you have had that background, you probably have got some foundation of medicine that you can pull pretty quickly from once you learn this business. So I would be careful if you're just getting into this business that you've got your feet grounded first. If you have some experience, then I would say this is something that you very easily could step into with a little bit of practice. You could do this very easily. You probably find that you do it anyway, sitting at your desk working through these cases as you
Yes.
go already.
And you bring up an interesting point, because I did some screening of cases early on in my business, and then I found that there were two physician backgrounds who were very interested in screening cases for me. One was an intensivist and one was an emergency department doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And I subcontracted that work to them, and they did the analysis, wrote the reports. I proofread them, edited them. And in some cases, they went on to be the experts if it was within their area.
Yeah.
But otherwise, they had that broad background that you've just identified.
Right.
You have to be ready for anything and anyone who walks through the door in an ER or an ICU. And that gives a person with that clinical perspective the ideal background to look at a wide variety of cases.
Right. I agree wholeheartedly, because you never know. I was in the emergency room for almost 17 years. And so you never knew what was going to walk in the door. So that's the reason they call it from the cradle to the grave. And so, I started in neonatal intensive care. So I really had before, cradle. And so, it does help when you have that type of physiology background and that type of critical care experience. It really helps. If you don't have that experience, you might have a little bit of a learning curve to understand. But if you've got a really good grasp on acute care and the physiology of it, that I think you can very easily step into this and understand and put the pieces of medicine together and be able to screen these things much more quickly. And the other thing is, when I screen them, even before I have records, sometimes I'll go ahead and pull research that just lets me know, how often can a patient with acute glaucoma, how often will they get, peripheral blindness, even with appropriate treatment, and have those ready to go even before I present it to the attorney. When I present it, sometimes I've already got the research behind it. So it does help to have that critical care background, very much so.
And my last question for you is, I know that there are going to be some questions. What would be the best way for people to contact you if they had questions about what they've heard today?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn. My spelling is a little different, so I'm going to spell it for you. But I think I'm the only one out there. If there's another Gyalia out there with my spelling, I'd love to meet you. But it's Gyalia. It's a little different. So Gyalia Rutledge. And I'm on LinkedIn. Or if you'd like to email me, it's the spelling of my first name. So Gyalia at grconsultinginc.com, GR Consulting Inc. And then, of course, I've got a cell phone number if anybody's interested in that as well. I'm at 706-564-0191. Be happy to take any phone calls or text messages if you'd like to contact me that way. That's fine as well. So that's the general way, the most effective way to get in touch with me. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Gyalia, for sharing so much. I know that you've opened up the minds of many people who are listening to this podcast, thinking about this as a service. Certainly the benefits to the law firm are very clear, and the benefits to you as a legal nurse consultant are very clear as well.
Well, thank you. I really hope that this can open the doors for a lot of legal nurse consultants trying to figure out another way to market and to, open up their business. So I really do hope some of your listeners can take and use this effectively.
Thank you. And for you who's been watching this program or listening to it, be sure to give a review on the audio channel that you're using. Give us some comments about what this program meant for you. If you're watching it on our YouTube channel, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you get notified about new episodes. Leave a comment, leave a like or a dislike. Tell us what you think, and I look forward to seeing your comments. And be sure to stay tuned. We'll have a new program, new guest coming up soon. Thanks so much. Coming up next on Legal Nurse Podcast is Debbie Whirl, who is a legal nurse consultant with experience since 2005. And one of the services that she provides is cost projections. You may not be familiar with this term, or you may think it's the same as a life care plan, and it's not. Debbie, tell our viewer or our listener, what are some of the key topics that we covered in your podcast?
Thanks, Pat. So one of the things obviously is, what is it? Um, who needs these services? What qualifications are necessary for doing this particular job? And I will give a couple examples of the types of projections that are out there. What records I need to get when one is done, how it's done, what qualifies me for doing it, and I use today's dollars rather than projecting what it's going to cost in the future. Why is that? So, and the best formatting for this procedure, which really works out well in mediation.
Your attorney clients, particularly plaintiff attorneys, will find this service to be invaluable in helping to make sure that there's enough money in a demand for settling a case to cover the cost of future care, so that the clients get what they need and the money is available for them when they have to face these additional medical costs. Be sure to come back for Debbie Whirl's podcast on the cost of future care, the cost projection tool, and how it's used. I'm Pat Iyer. We've been talking with Debbie Whirl, and you will see her next up on the next version of Legal Nurse Podcast. Come on back.